So, this week Brexit kind of kicked off, and any hopes of decency and negotiations being done in the best interests of everyone kind of faded out. And the underhanded tactics of the EU start. Negotiations haven't really got started yet, and just as well, as the so far amateur spin doctoring and hectoring from some in the EU doesn't bode well for the future of the EU or any potential trade agreement that will benefit anyone. Prime Minister Theresa May said, "Leaving with no deal is better than leaving with a bad deal," and it appears that her words are starting to have a resonance, because so far from the EU, every soundbite and quote, it appears they're attempting to belittle the United Kingdom at every step, which historically has never been a particularly wise negotiating plan. In the words of Tony Stark,
not a great plan.
Guy Verhofstadt, the EU's chief negotiator, recently tweeted, because that's what professionals do over important things like Brexit, they tweet, the following: "Any #Brexit deal requires a strong and stable understanding of the complex issues involved. The clock is ticking. It's time to get real." Clearly he's been reading the British media, who have made much of Theresa May's strong and stable election motto that has often been repeated over and over during her speeches. Is he making an election reference to be meta, or is it for other reasons? Well, obviously it's the latter. Back in April, Verhofstadt offered his opinion on Theresa May, calling an election as simple opportunism, and that her claim of having a stronger position at the EU negotiating table was nonsensical. Firstly, whether or not the Prime Minister has been opportunistic over an opposition party that is in such disarray, or doing it for the national interest, is hardly the business of the EU's chief negotiator. That Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party lurch from one crisis to the next, and are at their most weakest right now, frankly, I'd be ashamed of Theresa May for not taking full political advantage. It shows strength and determination, something Labour are in short supply of. But secondly, in spite of Verhofstadt's claim that Theresa May is being nonsensical about a strengthened position at the EU table, his dishonesty is showing. He knows full well that the negotiations for Theresa May extend further than the Brussels deal table. She needs to go back to Parliament to secure their approval as well, so her having more MPs does precisely mean she is more likely to get that approval, having sought a general election win based on the mandate of taking us out of the EU. But Verhofstadt isn't being dishonest for no reason whatsoever. He is being dishonest for a very sane reason. The EU needs Theresa May to be in the very weakest position possible going into the negotiations, and undermining her back at home going into a general election is one of the ways they've decided to try and do it. What the EU really needs is for the Conservatives to lose the election and for Jeremy Corbyn to become Prime Minister, because then they know that the gravy train can continue unmolested for the foreseeable future. Why? Because the EU absolutely doesn't want the UK to leave the European Union, and more importantly, doesn't want the UK to be a success outside of the European Union, lest others decide to follow suit, because that will mean the end of the Brussels gravy train of high salaries and very generous pensions. Presidential hopeful Emmanuel Macron is already towing the EU line, with bluster about how the EU needs to change and will change once he's elected President of France. Why is he saying this? Because his main opposition, Marine Le Pen, has made it quite clear that should she become president, France will get an EU referendum just like the UK did. Macron is shamelessly trying to paint himself as just as firm on the subject of the EU as Le Pen is, in the hopes that those on the fence will vote for him come the 7th of May. But the fun doesn't end there. Oh no. European sources have been speaking to the willing ears of the German media, who are only too happy to report that the informal dinner between Jean-Claude Juncker and Theresa May in Downing Street didn't quite go according to plan, with the former of the opinion that he was less than 50% sure that a deal could be reached. Theresa May claims none of this is true, and I've no reason to doubt her. After all, the statement put out by the European Commission seems to back up May, and not Juncker. Not least of all Juncker himself, who said the talk was And I quote Bill and Ted here.
Excellent!
Is it the actions of German newspapers determined to sell a few extra copies by writing anything and hiding behind a European source? If that were the case, surely a representative Jean-Claude Juncker would have issued a correction or denied the story. Thus far, nothing is forthcoming. The penultimate piece of idiocy from the EU this week is that in spite of the UK having been the second largest contributor to the EU for the past 42 years, and one of the few that gets back less than it contributes, according to German Chancellor Angela Merkel, we are not entitled to any of the EU buildings portfolio to reduce our supposed Brexit bill. And finally, talking about the Brexit bill, if you thought that it couldn't get more ludicrous, then you are very much more mistaken. That initial demand for 50 billion is a thing of the past, as that demand is now skyrocketed to 100 billion, and we are expected to continue paying contributions until 2020, long after we have left the EU. At the moment, it appears the soundbite of "no deal is better than a bad deal" will gain more momentum as the negotiations, if you can call them that, continue, because it's clear to anyone with a functioning brain that the EU is absolutely desperate for Brexit to fail at all costs. Please like, comment, subscribe if you can be bothered. Bye.